I had a hunch that I wasn't going to make any fortune from the tobacco crop, good as it looked. The big problem in New Guinea was to find a market for your produce, whether it was tobacco or anything else. Transportation wasn't worked out well, and you had to move things a long distance, which was costly. The Australian government didn't spend much money on New Guinea expansion. I had read about stock operations and hatched the idea of floating a tobacco corporation. Get people to buy in on my plantation. Have money to work with. Expand the area of cultivation. Find means of selling it. I decided to go back to Sydney and to try to interest businessmen there in joining me in forming my tobacco corporation. I went to the businessmen around Port Moresby, but getting letters of recommendation was tough. I was astonished to read about myself in one note after another. To whom it may concern, this gentleman is honest, enterprising, imaginative, and a good man to do business with. To whom it may concern, I have known Mr. Flynn long and have great confidence in him as a budding financier. I heartily recommend him to any and all businessmen interested in developing a large and profitable enterprise. To whom it may concern, the young gentleman bearing this letter has done business with me many times, and it is a pleasure to say to all to whom he comes, he here is a fine character and a substantial citizen. To whom it may concern, this is Mr. Errol Flynn, mariner, tobacco grower, man of enterprise. He will go far. He has my best wishes in any enterprise in which he invests himself. Who, me? I hardly knew myself, even though I'd written them myself. I gathered together a parcel of photographs of the plantation, a folio full of facts on production and costs, and other pertinent papers into a bundle about 2 feet high. I would parlay this into a fortune, if I could. I wrote to my father and commented on this development. What a scene for me, Dad! Inviting hard-headed businessmen to trust their hard-won cash in my hands. Actually, the businessmen around Port Moresby figured I stood a good chance of floating £12,000. If I set up the deal, I intended to work the plantation for about a year and then get out of New Guinea. Why only a year, Dad? I wrote. That's what I'm writing you about, and it's going to be extremely difficult to explain and make you understand that I'm more in earnest now than I've ever been before. I've acquired ambition. Yes, I had. I think I acquired it after my trip to Tahiti. The bug of writing or acting, or in some other way leading, was planted in me forever. One way or the other, I was going to get my hands on some money and get the hell out of the South Seas. The reading I had done must have given me some polish. Certainly, it steamed up my ambitions. At the time, I was studying the lives of various great lawyers of England and the United States. I knew that I had certain forensic faculties. My articulation was good. I practiced speaking. I feel that I could have made a good lawyer. I had the appearance, and a courtroom lawyer is also an innate ham, nothing more than a courtroom Barnum. Beyond these instincts for public life, I had political feelings. I was even emotional about them. I was going to be Sir Galahad and clean up every part of the world. There was a touch of the revolutionist about me. It was nothing more than a pipe dream, but idealistically, I was on sound ground. For even way down there, I got a hold of the literature of communism. In that day, 1928 through 1931 or so, there were some big names out of Russia: Radek, Zinoviev, Stalin. The Sydney Library even sent Karl Marx to me, and I'll wager I'm one of the few people in the world who ever read that bore from beginning to end. Living as I did in New Guinea by myself, it seemed the only answer to the world's problems. Around me, was the Paleolithic world that seemed so backward and so in need of some kind of ethic. Marx, it seemed, had the answer. In short, I was one of a breed of the young men who filled the Western world at the time. But now, rereading him, I still find him the dullest son of a bitch you can opiate yourself with. How he could have spearheaded such a giant movement in the world was thrilling in my early 20s. Someone, I don't know who, it might have been me, said, "Any man at the age of 25 who is not a communist has no heart. Any man who still is at the age of 35 has no head." I even sent away to Australia for a correspondence course in ballroom dancing. I would take a chair and dance around the room, pushing the chair and trying to get rhythm. The fact is, I was consuming books of all sorts with genuine greed, with more interest than if I had been studying at Cambridge or Trinity College, Dublin. I knew now I had to make another effort to overcome my lack of formal schooling, somehow to make up for my delinquent and disinterested years. These were my character forming years, for good or what have you. Many influences worked on me. The savagery of the jungle, my father's culture, my mother's not too expert maternal makeup, but certainly artistic leanings. I was torn between the social patterns of the West and the free-flowing tribal life of New Guinea. There was the impress on me of Melanesian girls. I read, studied, experimented at mental self-improvement, as in the backdrops I heard always the steady tones of the garamut from the hearts and souls of my antediluvian New Guinea friends. I had arrived in New Guinea 4.5 years earlier. I was now 22. I had reached the end, I hoped, of a prolonged adolescence. But, as I wrote my father, if it's been slow, it's been good, and the consciousness of life I now have is perhaps all the more thorough on account of these years. 2 old friends of mine came over from Eddy Creek the other day. One of them, Jack Ryan, is 50 years old. It was he who was mainly instrumental in having the charge of murder squashed against me in the other territory. The other fellow is the same age, and he's going away for good on account of blackwater fever. Underground, I mean. I told my father how both of these fellows had come to this country at the same age as I, but they had hung on there, always hoping to get to the other side of some hill that always looked prosperous. But they'd never amounted to a damn, even though they were admirable men. Seeing them, listening to them talk about their foredoomed life in New Guinea, hearing them regret they hadn't got out when they were younger, threw me into a panic. Would I end up that way? I knew that Jack Ryan would hang on. He'd die here. But did Flynn have to? I confided to him that I was beginning to doubt the long odds and the big gold strike, or the big fortunes in copra or tobacco. There was grave danger I'd fritter away my life here in these strange wastes. It came out of me, in that letter dated 24 May 1932, what I wanted to be, my secret dream, the one I've never realized. The dream that worked up there inside of me when I read by the hurricane lamp at night and felt force and energy growing on me, and decided I wanted to conquer, not a colonial land like some early day Columbus, but the West, like a man of today. If you remember, Potter, it's always been my most cherished ambition, if I ever made money here, to do something worthwhile. I intended to go to Cambridge and read for the bar, knowing full well that natural advantages suited me for that profession, and realizing I possess one really excellent advantage of an almost congenital knowledge of human nature, which New Guinea has accentuated. Forgive me blowing, but I know it's so. I hope to get called up and then try to keep going in the first lean years by writing. I may still be able to do it by going home in 2 years' time, but if I wait any longer, it will be too late and I'll be anchored here for good, or rather bad. I'm conscious of a lack of education whenever I try to write anything really serious. I eschewed education mainly through my own impulsiveness and a distaste for the grind of the uninteresting parts. But I also missed it because I thought it would be a load off your shoulders financially at a time when you were up to your neck in debt. I suppose it did ease the strain, too. In my present illiterate, almost unintelligent, uneducated condition, my chances of ever doing much worthwhile in literature are rather negligible. Singularly enough, I've never wanted to read letters at Cambridge, but have always hankered for the bar, which appeals to me more than anything in life. It is sometimes permissible to go up to Cambridge without first passing the entrance matriculation. If you are given permission to read for it at the end of the first or sometimes the second year, I could probably manage on £300 a year or less, as my time would be devoted to study exclusively, and moreover, I could earn a bit from writings as I'm doing now. My income in the last 6 months or so has been £20. Colossal, isn't it? But it could be a lot more if I could write what people like instead of what I like. Dad, what if I fail here to float this show? I'm getting out, anyhow, of New Guinea, and will try freelancing in London, if the worst comes to worst. But this is the crux. Would you put me through Cambridge? A big thing to ask, I know. 3 years at £300 is £900, and another year in the Inns of Court at something less. A bad investment, I must admit, on the face of my performance to date. But I know I could get through it if you were prepared to take the risk and make the sacrifice. For God's sakes, don't think I somehow expect you to educate me and give me a profession as a sort of paternal duty or obligation. I deliberately chose the bed I'm sweltering on at present, and unless you care to make the sacrifice, I'm quite prepared to lie on it, unpleasant though it most decidedly will be. I shall come to England immediately if I fail here. I suppose to analyze my gladness at the prospect of leaving, it would be discovered that fear lies at the bottom of it. I don't trust my health after seeing so many of my friends taken out of here on a stretcher by Blackwater. Good God, you never know who's going next lately. Dad, if you can make this sacrifice, I'll try and make it worth your while. I'm no fool, and New Guinea, with its enormous variety of queer customers, has taught me more about men than I'd learn in 20 years in a city like London. You never know. I might go far at the bar, but if you'll give me the chance to try. I, of course, never knew at the time that I'd be spending much of the rest of my life in court, not as a lawyer, but as a defendant, and that I was doomed, in part, to a life of the bar anyway, both bars. Whatever father reasons, I think he was just simply moneyless. I never went to Cambridge, and he never asked me to come on to England to make a try at becoming another Gladstone. I had to continue to scrap it out on my own, find my own directions, get out of New Guinea, under my own sail, go where the winds would blow. The winds blew south. I decided to enter Sydney spectacularly. I suppose I always had a sense of showmanship. Always. It was certainly present then. I needed to draw attention to myself so as to be able to approach the businessmen and put my solid proposition to them. I brought 8 Melanesian gentlemen savages from behind the Lailoki district on board the steamer that took me south. They had never even seen the town of Port Moresby and knew of the outside world only by rumor. They had seen 1 or 2 planes zoom overhead. They had heard guns bark. That was about all. Yet, I got a hold of a dwarfish chieftain named Anatok one day, and with interpreters and my pidgin talk, I painted a picture of the great wonders of a land far away. Would he not like to go there with me and see it all and take some of his tribe? They could go as they were. With a case full of papers and the tobacco proposition, I boarded ship with the Stone Age men, who were practically naked except for blazes of color. They wore white egret feathers in their headdresses, flowers behind their ears, and other adornments taken from birds, tree-climbing kangaroos and alligators. Ordinarily, their penises were sheathed in some kind of cloth like jock, neatly wrapped, but I decided to outfit them with sailor pants when we entered Sydney. As we reached Sydney Head and the beams of two lighthouses revolved, my Kanakas stood transfixed. Translucent shafts turned, and they giggled and guffawed when the light bathed them. Their fuzzy hair went straight up into the air. We arrived at the waterfront, and I took them through the streets. I observed the spectacle of them as they watched the spectacle of the city. Cars, buses, bicycles, lights. They were astonished to see horses drawing carts. They had never seen or heard of a horse. They jumped up and down and emitted shrieks while the Sydney people stared at them and trailed. I took them over to the Sydney Bulletin. I had been corresponding for the paper for the past 6 months, sending them news of New Guinea, chiefly of the Port Moresby area. They had even sent me a total of £20 for the articles I wrote. I thought I'd like to work on the staff of a newspaper. I visualized myself as a great journalist. Writing itched in me. We did get a considerable news story. Mr. Flynn returns from New Guinea with company of Papuans. He is here to make stock flotation in tobacco. I moved about Sydney with my boys, quite the circus, for several days. It would be all I could do to show these fellows the sights just a day or two longer and then arrange for their shipment back to the Leiloki district. Fortunately, I worked out a deal whereby they would partially work their way back. I took them to Anthony Horton's, then the biggest department store in Sydney. They ran about the main floor with a tremendous excitement, observing it all, and they themselves observed by the customers and the staff. They couldn't believe what they saw and heard. A clock, it ticked, an alarm rang. We entered the elevator, and it was a tense moment. Anatok took a stern grip on my arm. Taubada, we go to Big Master now. When the lift reached the 3rd floor and we got out, I told him that Big Master, that is, God, had taken us safely there. They ran through the toy shop. They stood in awe before the millinery, the lavas, the ribbons, the bizarre colors. How universal it is, I thought, for men to be drawn to colorful clothes and personal body adornments. Anatok made a purchase and gave a shopgirl his only £1 note for some cloth. She took the money and put it in a little metal box, then placed the box on a wire over her head. She pulled a cord and the money darted down the line. Anatok asked for the cloth and he couldn't get it yet. He decided he'd been cheated. He raced down the aisle in pursuit of the vanishing change box. He traced it from counter to counter, running as fast as a monkey. The people stepped out of his way. The assistants quit work. He zigzagged for a distance, then lost trace of the flying box. He tried to find his way back to the counter. I had quite a time restoring order, trying to put things right. I took them to the movies. A Wallace Beery picture. There was much gunplay in the picture. They knew about guns and were delighted when someone was shot, just like civilized people. When I got this band of Papuans back on board ship, I settled down to the business of approaching the biggest businessmen in Sydney. I got nowhere, rapidly. New Guinea was far away. They knew the handicaps of doing business of any kind there. Nobody yet had worked up any fortune by growing produce in the islands. It was too remote. It was a gamble. They didn't know me. They weren't sure of Melanesian labor. I returned to the bar in the Usher's Hotel, and there was the same bartender. "Remember me?" I asked. "Sure, Cobber," he replied. "What are you looking for now? Free beer?" "No, I'd like to buy you one for change." "No, I'd like to buy you one for change," I said, and proceeded to tell him how I used to make my living simply by buying a pack of cigarettes from him every day and using the free lunch counter. "Do you think me and the boys didn't know what you were doing, Cobber?" he said. "We got our money's worth just watching you strut in here every day as though you owned the hotel, when anybody with one eye could tell your only capital was about a shilling. You think you're the only broke that's ever been on his arse?" I think now that must have been my first public performance as an actor. When people ask me about it, I say that a long matinee run in Sydney was my first real role. Yet I had one more moment of glory. In the wake of the Bounty arrived its first showing at one of the big theaters. I made it known at once that I was in this picture, playing the part of Fletcher Christian. The Sydney Bulletin announced that Errol Flynn, tobacco grower of New Guinea and a former dockyard Sydney boy, just returned from the islands with 8 Melanesians who had aroused much interest, was now the center of another novelty. I called at the theater and introduced myself. The manager was delighted. Would I not make an appearance on the evening of the first showing of the picture? "And what is the fee, sir?" "Well, won't this be good publicity for you and the picture?" I made it clear I dislike work with no pay. "Will £3 do?" "You bet £3 would do." That evening, Naomi went to the theater with me. The manager made an announcement before the picture was flashed on the screen. He said that Errol Flynn, who would appear as Fletcher Christian in the picture, was here in person. I was decked out in a bizarre, out-of-date British uniform. There were only 2 actors' wigs in Sydney they could find, and they stuck one of them on me. It was parted in the middle, and it came down in a pigtail in the back. Blonde, tied with a bow, not like Clark Gable wore in Mutiny on the Bounty, and clapped over my ears so that I reminded myself vividly of an elder keeper of a whorehouse in King William Street, a little place of some integrity which I was prone to frequent. And so it was that I made my debut as a motion picture actor. In a few weeks I was, as of old, back in the Sailor's Rest. You either slept in your clothes or on them. It was better to sleep on them, because if you turned them over to the management to hold for you till morning, you would get them back deloused, wrinkled, dried, but with a foul grease or soap smell permeating them. As you walked in the streets, anyone would know you had spent the night at the Sailor's Rest by the wrinkled, shrunk look of the chemically washed pants. I tried to keep deloused, clean and white. I wore my New Guinea helmet and carried a cane. I held my head higher than ever because my pockets were emptier than ever. A sound policy, I found. I tried to move with an air of owning at least a small portion of Australia, and wondered how I could. I was back at my old haunt, Usher's, stretching more than my fair share of cheese. I was back at my old haunt, Usher's, snatching more than my fair share of cheese and ham and bread at the counter. Then I met her, Madge Parks, statuesque, auburn-haired, married, rich, charming, sophisticated, age, crowding 40. I was out of my depth with this woman of the world who had been everywhere, seen everything. Of course, I thought, as I set eyes on her, there is no hope for me here. She is unattainable, way beyond me. But as we chanced to meet in front of ushers and she spotted me, somehow she had a different view of the possibilities. She moved toward me, sure-footed, without embarrassment, and asked some trivial questions about street directions that merely led into animated talk. She didn't make it obvious as we met there in the street, but there was a simplicity with which she handled things. "Will you dine with me?" After a few instants of talk about street directions. "Will you dine with me?" After a few instants of talk about street directions. Then, with a subtly inviting smile, "Do you like dancing?" We dined. We danced. She was very clever about paying the bill. She wouldn't embarrass you by passing money under the table. It would just be paid. You never knew exactly how she took care of that, but there wasn't an instant when you had to strike the heel of your palm and stammer, "How could I have come out without my money?" She was well able to pay, and she did. You walked out of the restaurant or dance place, bewildered, but not embarrassed. We went for a swim, and in her bathing suit she was the most enchanting woman, with a figure such as you would see on a flashy Man Appeal magazine cover, and with the air and walk of sophistication and ease. That was what intrigued me the most. Her ready smile and a charm that only a well-traveled Australian woman can have. But she was far too brilliant, too clever for me. What did she see in a type like me? Of the streets of Sydney and of hell, with a touch of the Wooloo Mooloo gang, with an arrogant air, and besides, flat broke. I never ceased to wonder at the strange rapacity of some women when they want something. Dr. Kimsey said that a woman only reaches her sexual prime at the age of 35, and she goes on flourishing in her love life till the age of 55. I concur. You would think it would be the other way around, that young girls, for instance, in their early 20s would be at the height of their sexual tempo. No, I'm for Kenzie. Madge was a living example of this, and she was my first experience with a sophisticated world that I knew existed but about which I felt fears and uncertainties. To complicate this sudden and exciting courtship with her, there was, in the background, my renewed engagement to Naomi. This was a relationship on a higher plane than what ensued with Madge. In those days, I believed that anyone who advocated long engagements was completely nuts. How in God's name are you supposed to stay at hand's length with somebody you're attracted to without getting down to the business of sex? I suppose it is possible, but it certainly wasn't with me. I only know if I touch the arm of a girl or a woman who fires me, I have got to go as far as I can, or as far as she will let me go. The emotion rises. What are you supposed to do? Just say goodnight, or have a Coca-Cola or something, and go home aching from the scrotum up? Nonsense. With Madge, this question never arose. She just definitely made up her mind that she was going to seduce me, period. She made no disguise of her intent. She showed me a side of life which both terrified me and excited me, and drove me completely mad, so that I went up into the sky, high, spiraling, not knowing what I was doing. Then descending on a soft cloud and coming back to my senses. She knew how a sweet, kind, or soft gesture could be just right at the right moment. She knew how to place a soft kiss on the side of the cheek when you were still panting, hot, ravenous. She knew what to do with a man. If that is what I could then call myself. In any case, Madge brought it out of me, my manhood, taught me, started me, woke my understanding of the possible diversity and wonder of the female form. I felt frustrated, really upset that I couldn't invite her out to the nicest places. Besides, what about Naomi? How do you handle a virtuous, steady, while you have a married woman on the side? Not easy. My mind was turbulent. Madge had loosed me from clear and responsible moves. Madge knew better than anyone how to excite the senses. Naomi had no idea of this. Madge could get undressed in such a way that you panicked to behold her. Her undressing was a beautiful act, a theatrical performance. I have seen others since, but never till then. The way she slid her dress off, slipped out of her panties in a dancer's gesture, and put out the light at the same time as she took her brassiere off, giving me the most wonderful glance in that instant when the light flickered out. I wonder why women always leave their brassieres on till the last. Madge was my first experience of what a real woman could mean. My father had learned that I was flat. The manager of ushers called me into his office and smilingly asked me to sign a receipt for 100 English pounds. I still don't know where he dug it up for me, but it took me no time to splash the lot on Madge. Broke again. I saw the power of money more than ever. If a beautiful woman gave herself to you, what might you not be able to buy if you had money, and if you could select and choose and move at random throughout the wide world? One night, we lay in an anguishing tangle of arms and sensation, and I was waking. I sat up in bed and looked down at Marge, her beautiful hair on the coverlet of the pillow, a picture, a dream, a painting of a full woman, and she had been ineffably considerate towards me. I got up weak-kneed and staggered to the bathroom. I knew now that what I had done had destroyed Naomi for me forever. I needed more than Naomi could ever give. But there was no future for me in Madge either, and I am quite sure she knew it too. It was a mad affair for both of us, and somehow I sensed she was getting the better of the deal. Her demands were becoming nymphomaniacal. This will come as a surprise, but the vigorous, youthful Flynn constitution was beginning to crack and wilt under the strain. A desperation of purpose and wildness came over me. At that moment, my eyes lit on the dressing-room table. There, sparkling at me, were a few jewels, big ones, small ones. Some had gold or silver chains, and there were a couple of rings. One quick thrust, Flynn, and you can sweep up this stuff, put it in your pants pocket, and beat it. Hawk 'em, make some dough, then bail 'em out. And I looked back at the bed where she lay, a lovely picture, arms outspread, lovely full breasts. This is criminal, not the way to treat anybody. She has been so wonderful. How the hell can you think of this? But this wrestling with the conscience took no more than a few seconds. I knew it was the most dastardly thing I had ever done, but I must. Stealthily, I dressed. I scooped up the loot, tiptoed to the door, raced down the staircase like the joint was on fire. I hurried through the streets. It was nighttime, but I didn't run because I knew that a running man excites suspicion. I beat it back to the Sailor's Rest, wondering how to hide the loot. I knew enough not to put the stuff in the heel of a shoe. A false heel would be the first place anybody would look. Yet, if I were found with the jewels, I could go to jail. I could have said she gave them to me, and perhaps she would have if I asked her to. I was way out of my depth. She put me into a kind of stew that sophisticated women seem always to have done to me, then and later. In my cubicle, with barely 4 walls of plasterboard, I jammed into a small grip the little that I had, primarily my papers of the tobacco plantation and my letters of reference. Then I went for a special shaving brush. The handle was several inches long, and it had at the end a crown that unscrewed to reveal a hollow interior designed to hold a shaving stick. I placed the diamonds in there. Put a small end of the shaving stick on top of the diamonds, screwed the crown back on. If the authorities come around, I thought, and give me a going over and find this, they're very clever, and I've had it. I had to get out of town right away. Already I fancied I could feel the hot breath of the law after me. sizzling the back of my neck. I felt lousy, despicable, robbing a woman who'd given me a certain kind of ecstasy generously. True, she got what she wanted, but what about the question of principle? Anyway, I consoled myself. It was really only a loan, short or long term, preferably long. Sure as hell, the law did get after me, finding me on a boat that was set to leave Sydney. Two officers in plain clothes came aboard and got into my stateroom. The ship's captain was at hand. Stewards were about, crewmen. There was a hue and cry as the police went through every piece of luggage. They immediately attacked the heels of my shoes to see if they were hollow. They were not. They went through the padding of my shoulders. Nothing there. They left nothing to chance. I stood there with a face, I hoped, scornful, bewildered. I watched them with my eyes going around wheel-like and developed a sneer to make them feel ridiculous. But they didn't feel or look ridiculous as they went through the razor, the washcloth, through my socks, shoes, my belt, fingering everything, feeling everywhere for a concealed compartment. I sneezed violently when they handled the shaving brush, hoping to distract them. I had a camera. They took it apart so that it could never be used again. "Are you two shitheads finished?" I asked. "What do you want to do? Turn me upside down? Why don't you take one leg and you take the other and shake me? I might have them up my arse." One said, "That would not be a bad idea. The first one of you bastards who raises a hand to me, I'll shove him right through that porthole, whether he fits or not." I had the feeling that if anyone touched me, I'd go berserk. These guys took a good look at me. I must have looked to them like a cornered rat, dangerous to tangle with. "Come and touch me, one of you yellow-livered sons of bitches, but watch yourselves." I was ready. They looked at each other and decided against it, although together the two of them could easily have handled me. They got off the ship. I waited till the boat got away and until it was nightfall. While the ship moved, I felt guilty as hell, but now not as much as I should have. Once alone, I unscrewed the bottom of that shaving brush and looked at the handful of jewels. I pressed open the platinum settings, threw them into the water one by one by one. Here would be a beautiful ring. There would be the first baguette diamonds just coming into fashion at that time. The platinum went over the side. No identification. That was my theory, and sure enough, I was right. From then on, I had a stake. There was something to be said for being a crook, if you got away with it. I had no illusions about myself, but felt happy. I had left Sydney as a thief, but what was done, and it was all behind me. That was the first and only time a woman ever had to pay for what she got from me. Later, when I began to make hundreds of thousands a year, I hired people in Australia to locate Madge to repay her for the short-term loan of her jewels. But the agency never could. And anyway, I still feel that she got the best end of the stick. There should be a moral in this, that having money makes you honest. I went north as far as the port of Brisbane. That was as far as I could get. I couldn't sell the stones. I didn't try. That was my dot. If I could get to England, maybe I could convert them to cash. So again, I was flat broke. I either had to swim back to New Guinea or start walking. That's what I did. I started walking across Queensland, hoping to work my way and hop any available freights to the north coast of Australia. New Guinea was still my best bet for making a big kill. I hadn't conquered it. Some had. A few had won out there and gone away with a big boodle. I knew how rich and terrible that land was. Its entrails loaded with gold, copper, and all kinds of natural wealth, teeming with animal life and ablaze with rich verdure. I must take another flyer at that gold, line my pockets, and move up into the big time. I took a job at well digging in a place called Diamond Downs in the interior of Queensland. This was a great expanse of near desert in the western side of Queensland near central Australia. Day after day, I sweated in the broiling sun as the shafts went lower and lower, looking for water in a land where there wasn't much. During the day, I dreamed of nightfall when it was a bit cooler and there might be a faint breeze. When the breeze came in, when the breeze came, it was fainter than that. For 2 months, we dug, and still no water. How to get out of here? What was I doing here, digging in a desert wild, while the world of New Guinea, which still beckoned me, lay to the north? I began to hope for that lucky destiny that I felt always hung over us Flynns, and that so far hovered over me. I looked out around over the sea of dry earth and stared at the bleak white sky and hoped wistfully for some kind of rescue. Then it came. A fellow named Copley stopped by the site where I was digging. He told me he worked for Jack Sterling, owner of a sheep ranch 80 miles away. Mr. Jack had 50,000 sheep, and he was rich. By God, I'd like to work for him. You would? What are you getting now? I told him. It was little enough. He said sheep droving paid better. What do you know about sheep droving? Huh, what do I know about it? Only everything. My expression looked pained, I hoped. Copley explained that his job was to herd sheep from the Diamond Downs region to Townsville, about 800 miles away. As sheep could only travel a few miles a day, the trip would take a long time. It would be tough finding water, let alone grazing. Okay, first let's go see Mr. Jack and have him hire you. Then you and I take the sheep over country. Remember, it might take half a year. I quit well digging and set out with Copley to Sterling's sheep ranch, or station as the Australians called it. It was located in one of the most desolate parts of Australia. Mr. Jack turned out to be a big, lean, hard-boned, outback Australian, a man of the rough, tough, shearing sheds. He was fantastically rich, and sometimes had as many as 100,000 sheep on his ranch. They had to keep going to the coast. I liked the way Mr. Jack was enshelled, with his big house set smack in that desert spot. But before I could get to know some sheep, there was work to be done on the ranch.